No one in the courtroom expected what happened next. Not the clerks, not the officers, not the handful of people waiting for their cases, and least of all Judge Frank Caprio himself. It was supposed to be a routine morning docket in Providence Municipal Court. A few speeding tickets, a parking violation or two, the usual. But when the defendant stepped forward, hands trembling, eyes avoiding every face in the room, a quiet tension spread like a ripple across the benches. And then, moments later, something occurred that would shake the entire courtroom, trigger a live political scandal, and end the promising career of a state representative who believed he was untouchable. No one knew it yet, but the next 10 minutes would change everything. The defendant's name was Elias Moreno, a 27-year-old maintenance worker from the south side of Providence. He had been summoned to court for 3 unpaid parking citations, totaling a few $100s. But the way he clutched the paperwork, you'd think it was a sentence to life. The courtroom was unusually still as he approached. A cloudy, heavy atmosphere hung over him, the kind that makes even spectators straighten in their seats without knowing why. Something was off. Not wrong, not dangerous, just quietly, unmistakably off. Elias kept swallowing, as if forcing back words he wasn't ready to speak. He looked like a man trying to hold himself together with threadbare emotional string. Judge Caprio studied him for only a few seconds before sensing it. That almost invisible signal people give off when they're in trouble, far deeper than the paper in their hand. Judge Frank Caprio leaned slightly forward in his chair, glasses low on his nose, that familiar blend of warmth and seriousness settling over his face. In decades on the bench, he had seen almost everything, from the comedic to the tragic, from the petty to the profound. But he never let routine numb him. Every defendant was a person. Every story deserved to be heard. And something told him this young man's story wasn't about parking tickets. Caprio's voice was calm, seasoned, and steady with empathy. "Good morning, sir. Take a deep breath. You're all right here." But as Elias exhaled, his hands still shook. Caprio's internal thoughts shifted, registering that subtle tremor, the way a doctor notices a symptom beneath the surface. He's afraid, the judge thought, not of the fine, of something or someone else. The courtroom waited. When the judge asked Elias to state his name, his voice cracked. Not from attitude, not from carelessness, from exhaustion, deep, soul-worn exhaustion. "My name is Elias Moreno, Your Honor." Caprio tilted his head slightly. "All right, Mr. Moreno. Let's see what brings you here today." The clerk read the citations, but Judge Caprio noticed Elias's breathing grow fast, uneven, as if each word about the fines tightened something around his chest. Caprio looked at him again, really looked, and saw more than fear. He saw collapse. "Mr. Moreno," the judge asked softly, "how are you holding up today? You seem a bit unsettled." Elias blinked rapidly. His gaze darted toward the back of the courtroom, almost like he expected someone to walk in after him. Someone he didn't want to see. Then the truth started to unravel. I lost my job 2 months ago," Elias began. "I was working at a small housing complex. Maintenance and repairs. Nothing fancy. Just enough to get by." Caprio nodded gently. "And what happened?" Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. "The owner cut hours, said he had to make changes. I was the first to go." A few people in the back shifted, sympathetically. Judge Caprio kept his eyes locked on the young man. "And since then, I've been looking. Every day. Applying anywhere. But it's been rough. And my mother's sick, Your Honor. She needs help getting around. Dialysis, twice a week. I take her." His voice trembled on the word, mother. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Caprio leaned back, absorbing everything quietly. "That must be difficult," he said. Elias swallowed again. "It is. I'm trying. Really trying. The tickets. I only parked where I did because I had to get her inside fast. She was dizzy. She collapsed in the lobby once." A small gasp came from someone in the back row. Elias wiped his hands on his jeans, nervous. "I know it's my responsibility. I'm not making excuses. I didn't know what else to do." Judge Caprio, could feel the weight of this young man's life. The kind that doesn't show in court documents or violation numbers. But still, something wasn't adding up. Something in Elias's eyes. Something more. Caprio sensed it. Mr. Moreno, is there anything else you want to tell me? Something you're holding back? The young man's jaw clenched again. He hesitated. Then he whispered, "There's someone who told me to come here today. Someone who said he could take care of it if I needed." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Caprio raised an eyebrow. And who might that be? Elias's hands trembled again. He didn't answer. Not yet. Judge Caprio straightened slightly. Sensing this was the moment the true story began. "Mr. Moreno," he said kindly, "you're in a safe place here. No one is going to harm you. You can speak freely in this courtroom." Elias shook his head. "No, Your Honor. I'm afraid to say." "Why is that?" Elias opened his mouth but closed it again, like the words were too heavy to push out. The clerk exchanged glances with the bailiff. Caprio softened his voice even further. "Listen," he said. "I've been doing this a long time. Whatever is going on, we'll address it fairly. You have my word." Elias stared at the floor. "Finally," he whispered, "he told me if I said anything, he'd make sure I never worked in this state again." The courtroom stiffened. Caprio's expression sharpened, still calm, but now alert. "Who told you this?" Elias's breathing grew erratic. He lifted his eyes only halfway. "A state representative." 2 or 3 people audibly gasped. The clerk froze mid-pen stroke. Even the bailiff shifted his stance, eyebrows raised. Caprio's voice remained steady. "Mr. Moreno," he said carefully, "are you telling me that an elected official contacted you about your case?" Elias nodded slowly. He said he could fix it. Silence. Thick, chilling silence. Caprio glanced around the room to signal order, though no one dared move. "Do you have a name?" Elias hesitated again, and then, before he could speak, a courtroom phone began to ring. A loud, shrill ring that sliced through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned. The clerk answered. 1 second passed. Then 2. Her eyes widened. She looked up at Judge Caprio, with shock plastered across her face. "Your Honor," she said, voice tight. "It's a state representative. He wants to speak to you. He says it's urgent." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Caprio's face went still. Not angry, not surprised, just quietly, dangerously thoughtful. He rose slightly from his seat, palm open. "Put him on speaker." The clerk hesitated. "Your Honor, he insists it be private." Caprio shook his head. "No, speaker. This is a courtroom, not a backroom negotiation." The clerk's hand trembled as she pressed the button. A voice crackled through the speaker system. "Judge Caprio, this is Representative Alan Birch. I believe you're handling a small matter involving one of my constituents. Let's talk about making this go away." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Caprio's eyes hardened with a calm, righteous fire. This was no longer about parking tickets. This was something far bigger. For a moment, the courtroom felt frozen. No one breathed. No one dared to move. Judge Caprio kept his eyes steady on the speakerphone. Hands folded, posture controlled, but full of quiet authority. "Representative Birch," he said calmly, "you're calling a live courtroom." A faint scoff echoed through the speaker. "Yes, Judge, I'm aware. Which is why I'd appreciate a moment of discretion here." Caprio's eyebrow lifted. "Why don't you tell me exactly what you're asking for?" A pause on the other end. Then Birch spoke in a low, confident tone. "Too confident. I understand you have a young man in front of you. Elias Moreno. Good kid. Has had a difficult stretch. I'd like to request you dismiss his citations. Consider it a courtesy." The entire courtroom felt the tension snap tighter. Judge Caprio didn't even blink. "A courtesy?" "Yes," Birch replied. "You know how these things go. He's had a rough year. He's one of mine. I take care of my people, and I'd appreciate you cooperating." The arrogance threaded through every word. Caprio leaned slightly forward, voice calm but sharp as polished steel. Representative Birch, are you familiar with the term improper influence? Another pause. Elias's face had gone pale. His hands shook at his sides as if he were watching something unfold he had prayed would never surface. The courtroom attendees sat stiff and wide-eyed, as if witnessing a collision in slow motion. Finally, Birch answered. Judge, let's not turn this into a spectacle. I simply called to resolve a small issue, nothing more. Caprio tilted his head. I'll decide what is appropriate in this courtroom. And I assure you, you have turned this into a spectacle all on your own. A whisper rushed through the crowd like a gust of wind. On the speaker, Birch's tone hardened. Judge, with all due respect, I don't believe you understand the relationships at play here. Caprio's eyes narrowed slowly, silently. Oh, I understand them perfectly. Inside, beneath his quiet stillness, Judge Caprio felt something he rarely allowed into his courtroom. Disappointment. Deep, human disappointment. After all these years, he thought, after all the trust the public places in its leaders, this is how some of them behave, as if justice is a personal favor to be traded like currency. He looked at Elias, the young man who now stared at the floor as though shame itself pressed down on his shoulders. This boy didn't ask for corruption, Caprio reflected. He asked for help. And someone in power decided help meant control. Caprio's mind moved through years of cases, thousands of people struggling parents, hard-working immigrants, seniors on fixed-income people who came into his courtroom with honesty. And now, here was a man who tried to bend justice with a phone call. It stirred something in the judge that wasn't anger, but a moral resolve as unwavering as stone. Justice must be fair, he thought, and fairness begins with courage. He straightened again. Time to show it. Representative Birch, Caprio said firmly. What exactly is your relationship to Mr. Moreno? On the speaker, Birch cleared his throat. He reached out to my office for assistance. We try to help constituents in need. Elias whispered under his breath, That's not true. Caprio heard it. Mr. Moreno, the judge said gently, did you contact this representative? Elias shook his head vigorously. No, Your Honor. He contacted me. More murmurs erupted through the courtroom. Caprio turned his gaze back to the speaker. Representative, did you initiate contact with this defendant? Birch hesitated too long. Judge, I believe this conversation is becoming unnecessarily adversarial. I don't appreciate being questioned like. Caprio cut him off, not with rudeness, but with controlled authority. You are speaking to a courtroom full of people, Representative. You are speaking on the record, and your words have consequences. Elias looked at Caprio, eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude, as if the judge were the only person in the world standing between him and a threat he didn't know how to escape. Caprio continued. Tell me again, why did you call this courtroom? On the phone, Birch exhaled sharply. To prevent a young man from being treated unfairly. And what unfairness is that? The fines, Judge. He can't afford them. Caprio nodded thoughtfully. And what made you believe that your intervention was appropriate, rather than encouraging him to handle his case through proper channels? A long silence. Then Birch said something that made the entire courtroom shift uncomfortably. Let's just say, I help those who are loyal. A quiet gasp broke from the back row. Judge Caprio's expression changed. Still calm, still composed, but with a depth of disappointment so profound, the room felt it like a drop in temperature. Loyalty, he repeated softly. Is that what you expect from people seeking justice? Birch replied, unaware of the hole he was digging. I expect gratitude for the help I provide. Caprio's eyes closed, only for a second. A small, private moment of sorrow. Then he opened them, and the wisdom behind them was unmistakable. Representative Birch, he said, your request is denied. A stunned silence. And furthermore, Caprio continued, you are dangerously close to interfering with a judicial proceeding through intimidation, coercion, and perhaps worse. On the phone, Birch's voice rose, strained and offended. Judge, be very careful with your accusations. Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. And I am an officer of the law. My duty is to the people, not to the powerful. A wave of electricity moved through the courtroom. Just when the moment seemed like it could not escalate further, Elias spoke up, voice trembling but finally courageous. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Caprio nodded gently. "Of course. Take your time." Elias's voice cracked, but he kept going. "He didn't offer to help me. He threatened me." The room sucked in a collective breath. Caprio leaned forward. "Threatened you how, Mr. Moreno?" Elias licked his lips, terrified but determined. "He told me that if I didn't support his re-election, he'd make sure I never worked maintenance in this state again. He said he had connections everywhere." The bailiff's posture stiffened. Several people whispered in disbelief. Elias continued, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "And when I told him I didn't want trouble, he said he'd do me a favor by calling the court. Not for me, for himself." Judge Caprio's heart tightened. Even for a seasoned judge, this was dark. He turned his attention to the speaker. "Representative Birch, would you like to respond to this allegation?" The voice on the phone grew defensive, agitated. "That boy is lying. He's just trying to save face. I never threatened anyone." Elias shook his head, tears falling. "That's not true. I have the voicemail." A ripple of shock swept the room. Birch's voice cracked ever so slightly. "What voicemail?" Elias reached into his pocket with shaking hands and pulled out his cracked phone. "I recorded it because I didn't feel safe." Judge Caprio's breath caught in his chest, not from surprise, but from the depth of the young man's fear. "Mr. Moreno," Caprio said, "is the voicemail still on your device?" Elias nodded. "Play it," Caprio instructed softly. The room fell into an expectant hush. Elias pressed a button. A moment of static. Then Birch's recorded voice filled the courtroom speakers, cold and unmistakably threatening. "Elias, listen carefully. You help me, I help you. But if you make me look bad, if you don't show loyalty, I'll make sure every maintenance job you apply for turns you away. Don't be stupid. I'll call the judge and make this whole thing disappear. Just stay in line." The courtroom reacted instantly, gasps, disbelief, even a few muttered curses. Birch's live voice came through the phone again, panicked now. "Judge, that's taken out of context." Caprio spoke with a calm that felt like the center of a storm. "Representative Birch, your career may have ended the moment you made that call." The silence that followed Judge Caprio's words was unlike anything the courtroom had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of truth, settling over everyone like a heavy, undeniable weight. Representative Alan Birch stammered through the speaker. "Judge, you're making a mistake. You can't. I mean, you shouldn't take this boy's word over mine. He's unemployed, desperate. You know how these kids are." Judge Caprio's expression sharpened. "Stop right there." His tone was soft, but carried the firmness of a man who had spent his life protecting dignity, especially the dignity of those without power. "Representative," Caprio continued slowly, "your words reveal more about you than any recording ever could." The courtroom watched Elias, who stood frozen, breath catching in shallow bursts. He didn't dare look up. He didn't know whether to cry, apologize, or run. Caprio's voice softened as he addressed him. "Mr. Moreno, you're safe here." That single line hit the young man so deeply he closed his eyes, releasing a trembling exhale as though he'd been holding his breath for months. The judge turned back toward the speaker. "Representative Birch," he said, "this conversation is no longer appropriate for open court. I am ending this call. Any further communication must go through the proper legal channels." Birch's voice rose sharply. "You'll regret this, Judge. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Caprio didn't flinch. "Good day, Representative." He gestured calmly, and the clerk ended the call. A deep, collective exhale came from the room like a held breath finally released. But Judge Caprio wasn't done. He folded his hands gently on the bench. "Court will note," he said clearly, "that an elected official attempted to interfere with judicial proceedings, and that the defendant provided evidence supporting this claim." His voice carried no theatrics, no anger, just truth, sealed firmly into the record. The clerk nodded, typing quickly. Elias looked up at the judge for the first time with something like relief flickering in his expression mixed with overwhelming fear of what came next. "Mr. Moreno," Caprio said gently, "you have been through quite an ordeal. I want you to take a breath." Elias nodded, but the attempt at a breath came out jagged, cracking into a sob he tried desperately to swallow. The judge motioned for a moment. The courtroom remained respectful, attentive, human. Elias wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "I didn't want to bring trouble to anyone," he whispered. I just wanted to take care of my mom." Caprio felt something twist inside him. A familiar ache from decades of seeing good people crushed under burdens they never deserved. "Tell me about her," the judge said softly. Elias blinked. "My mom? She..." His voice trailed, breaking. "She's all I have. My father passed when I was 14. I've been with her ever since." He shifted, embarrassed to be emotionally unraveling in front of strangers, but too tired to contain it anymore. "She's on dialysis. 3 days a week. I take her before sunrise. I sit with her. Some days, she cries from the pain, and I try to make her laugh. Try to pretend things aren't bad." His voice cracked like thin ice. "When I lost my job, she kept apologizing. Like it was her fault. Like she was the reason everything went wrong." He covered his face with his hands. "I didn't want anyone to know. Not the landlord. Not her. Not the state. I didn't want pity." Judge Caprio leaned back, his eyes soft with understanding. "What you're doing," he said quietly, "is not weakness. It's love." A few people in the gallery wiped their own eyes. Elias shook his head. "But I let him take advantage of me. I was scared. I just wanted to keep her safe. When he called, I didn't know what to do. I thought, maybe someone finally cared." Caprio breathed in slowly. "Powerful people caring about you should never come with threats." Inside, Frank Caprio felt a weight pressing behind his sternum, a heaviness he'd rarely allowed to show. "This boy is fighting battles that grown men with resources crumble under," he thought. No one should have to choose between caring for their mother and surviving political manipulation. His heart tightened as he remembered his own parents, immigrants, working long, hard hours, doing everything so their children could have a chance. He remembered his mother telling him, "Frankie, life is hard for people like us. That's why you help others when you can." That memory guided him still. And it guided him now. This young man doesn't need punishment, he reflected. He needs protection. Judge Caprio cleared his throat, signaling he was ready to deliver judgment. The courtroom hushed instantly. "Mr. Moreno," he began, "please listen carefully." Elias braced himself, shoulders tense, eyes lowered. "You were issued 3 citations for parking violations. Under normal circumstances, the fines could be substantial." Elias swallowed hard. Caprio continued, "But given the circumstances presented today, the medical needs of your mother, your loss of employment, and the deeply inappropriate pressure exerted upon you, I am dismissing all 3 citations." The courtroom erupted in soft gasps of relief. Some even smiled. Elias looked up, disbelief flooding his features. "But," Caprio added gently, "I am doing so not because someone asked, but because justice demands fairness." Tears fell down Elias's cheeks, this time unrestrained. "Thank you, Your Honor," he whispered. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Caprio smiled kindly. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep taking care of your mother. And take care of yourself as well. When you get back on your feet, and you will, I want you to come back and tell me how she's doing." Elias nodded, wiping his face. "I will."